Hello and welcome to Leela's first win in the CCC 7 Blitz Bonanza final. She's white, Stockfish is black, and they kicked off with a 4 knights game. Stockfish chose the Rubinstein Counter-Gambit with knight d4, gambiting e5. Now, taking on e5 is possible, but then white has to part with the like-squared bishop, and black will eventually get back the pawn by taking on e4. Leela didn't want that, so she played bishop c4. Stockfish keeps offering the e5 pawn, and he prefers to develop the bishop to the active c5 square. Leela says, alright, if you insist, I'll take your pawn, to which Stockfish immediately replied, queen e7, counterattacking the knight and the pawn, and the king. Knight back to f3, and now taking on e4 actually is not that good, because of knight d5 attacking the queen, and the ensuing complications favor white. If black removes the queen from the e file, then b4, attacking the defender of the knight, and this is quite strong. If bishop b6, then black loses a piece after knight takes, pawn takes, and knight takes here. And after b4, knight f3 check doesn't work either because of queen takes, and black still has 2 pieces attacked. And even though he can take here or give checks and stuff, in the end he will be down material. So after knight d5, in this position, black can't move the queen away, which means it has to go for a queen exchange and get into a worse position. After knight takes on f3, pawn takes, knight c3 check, knight takes queen, knight takes on d1, knight c8, knight f2, rook f1, knight h3, and now b4, distracting the bishop from defending f2. And the bishop doesn't have many choices. If it goes to b6 or d6, then the knight saves himself by taking it. And if bishop d4, then c3. And after bishop f6 comes f4, which is the point, not allowing the knight to escape. And eventually, black will have to give up the bishop and the knight for the rook. And white will stand better thanks to his bishop pair and better development. But instead of taking back immediately on e4, Stockfish played the much better d5, making use of the pin. Knight takes is playable, but Leela went for bishop takes and Stockfish replied with bishop g4, increasing the pressure on white's position. But this move also gives up on the idea of getting back the e4 pawn, because Leela now has d3 defending it. After c6, bishop back and knight d7, we can see more clearly Stockfish's idea of putting pressure on the knight on f3, ruining the king-size structure and attacking Leela's king. Leela played bishop e3, Stockfish replied knight e5, and what now? It looks like at minimum Stockfish will win back the pawn on f3 and will probably get also an attack on the king. So what to do? Taking on d4 doesn't really help much, since Stockfish can increase the pressure even more with queen f6. So I didn't get where Leela saw here +1 for white when black has pressure. But then Leela found a nice move, which apparently solves the problems. She just sacked her queen with knight d4. When I first saw this, I thought it's a web page error, and I refreshed the page. But still, knight d4 was played. There followed bishop takes queen, knight f5, queen f8, still defending the bishop, bishop takes, queen takes, rook d1, threatening d4, queen back, d4, knight g6, e5, long castle, short castle, and after the smoke cleared, we can see that Leela gave up her queen for bishop knight and 2 central pawns. And I was thinking, wow, Leela found a nice way to keep the initiative and the advantage, but then I checked the database and saw that actually this queen sack was played at least a dozen times by humans before. So kudos to us humans for finding such beautiful moves. Okay, so the game continued with king b8, knight e4, and black has to do something about the e5 pawn, since it allows the knights to jump to the very aggressive d6 square. Stockfish played f6, f4, defending not only the pawn, but also the knight if they exchange these pawns. Knight e7, knight d6, obviously, and knight d5. The black knight also found a nice square, but unfortunately for him, that is not what we call an outpost. The c pawn can and will drive the knight away, but first the knight is threatening a fork on e3, so Leela covered that with rook e1. Queen e7, c4, knight back, and now c5, not minding the black knight coming back to d5, since the d6 knight now is a monster. As Grandmaster Yasser once said, the more a knight is defended, the stronger it becomes. And this knight on d6 is very defended, and Stockfish can't touch it because that would give Leela a protected passed pawn on the 6th rank, and allowing that would be equal to suicide. Stockfish played f takes on e5, and Leela took back with the d pawn, which makes a lot more sense than taking with the other pawn. F takes on e5 allows the black rooks to activate on the f file, and the pawn on d4 is not very useful. White would rather prefer that file to be open and maybe park a rook on d6 at some point. So taking with the d pawn makes more sense. It also allows this pawn duo to march together. a5, g3, and the only chance for Stockfish is to open some files for the rooks, ideally the g file or the h file, or both, why not? Let's see if he can do that. Knight f5, queen d7, still defending g7, the other knight to d6. Leela is now threatening e6 with fatal consequences, so Stockfish blocked the pawn with knight e6. Bishop takes, queen takes, and now knight takes on g7. The g5 semi-opens, but black loses another pawn, and those knights prancing around are really annoying. Queen g8, knight f5, and queen d5. Stockfish now wins a pawn. Rook f2, queen takes on c5, rook d1, h5, still trying to open a file or two, king g2, and h4, to which Leela replied g4, keeping it closed. a4, a3, queen b6, king f3, rook d7. Now e6 would lose the pawn after queen b3 check. Rook d3, rook e8, trying to create some kind of a blockade, but g5, and Leela thinks she's already winning. Rook f8, knight e3, heading to f6, where from it defends f4 and allows the f and g pawns to advance. Rook e7, knight g4, rook e6, knight e4, king a7, knight f6, queen b5, rook d2, queen c4, knight back to d6, queen c1, king g4, h3, knight e4. There's a big fight. Leela is trying to advance those pawns safely, while Stockfish tries to hold her back and is looking for exchange sacrifices that would allow him to maybe get a perpetual check. Queen c4, rook c2, queen a2, knight g3, rook e7, rook e2, rook d8, and g6. Slowly those pawns will get to destination. The g-pawn in particular is very excited to become a queen. Queen b3, f5, c5, e6, c4, desperately trying to create some chance, knight e4, queen b5, knight c3. Leela is very patient. She likes to stop any counterplay before she launches the missiles. Queen c5, king takes on h3. That pawn won't become a queen now, that's for sure. And Harry is also ready to run up the field. King b8, king g2, queen c6 check. The queen is rushing to the newly opened h file to stop Harry. Knight e4, queen e8, h4, queen h8, h5, king c7, and Leela plays f6, starting the final battle. Rook takes on e6, g7, queen h6, rook f5, preparing to double the rooks, and queen Freddy. Stockfish thinks the time has come to give up a rook for 2 pawns. Rook takes, queen g7, rook f2, king b8, getting out of the fork, h6, queen h7, and in order to minimize counterplay, Leela now exchanges a rook. Rook takes, king a7, rook back to f6, and knight g5 is in the cards, so queen h8, stopping that. Knight e2, b6, knight c3, queen g8, king f3, king b7, king f4, king a7, knight g5, queen b8 check. Stockfish is looking for some perpetual check, but with those knights covering half of the board, there isn't any. King f5, queen c8, rook e6, queen f8 check, king g6, queen g8 check, king h5, and there are no more checks. Queen b8, h7, queen h2 check, king g6, queen b8, knight e4, c3, b takes, b5, knight d6, b4, c takes b4, queen d8, knight f7, queen d3 check, rook e4, queen a6 check, king h5, queen f1, and finally the queen promotes. Queen h1 check, rook h4, queen d1 check, king g6, and a couple of more checks were available, but Stockfish, disappointed, played queen d2. Having already won the game, Leela now proceeded, of course, with giving up her pieces and eventually mated with the queen, but not this one. No, she promoted the a-pawn instead. All in all, though, this was a great game. We had a beautiful queen sack, and then those knights were very annoying. And at the moment I'm recording this, they are in round 76, and Leela has an unbelievable 8.5 points advantage over the latest version of Stockfish. This is quite amazing. Baby Leela has grown up, and it looks like she finally takes over the crown from Stockfish. Now, of course, this is Blitz. CCC7 is Blitz, and we have to see what happens at longer time control in TCC's Premier Division, which just started, and also probably in CCC8, which will probably have a longer time control too. I would guess though that Leela will be strongest anyway. We will see though. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out the other videos. They are also great games. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Take care.